One accusation from the HOA turned my neighbors into a jury. I pulled into my assigned spot at Magnolia Terrace Community Association in Albuquerque and saw Debra Mullen standing next to my car door with her arms crossed and a phone on a gimbal pointed right at me. She started yelling before I even turned off the engine. "You were the last one near the charity box, and now it is gone," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I need you to come with me right now, or I am calling the police." I looked past her and saw the bright orange cone she had planted in the guest spot next to mine, like she owned the entire parking lane. I am a field service engineer, and I had just finished a 12-hour shift troubleshooting a data center cooling failure. The last thing I needed was an HOA board secretary with a phone gimbal and a cone acting like she was running a crime scene investigation. I got out slowly and kept my hands visible because I knew she was recording. "Debra, I have no idea what you are talking about," I said. "I have been at work since 6 this morning." She stepped closer and her phone was inches from my face now. "The charity cash box was in the clubhouse mail nook yesterday afternoon and you were seen near it," she said. "Now it is missing and you are going to pay the $140 that was inside, or I am filing a police report and blocking your deliveries until this is resolved." I felt my stomach drop because I was on probation at a new job and I could not afford to miss work for HOA hearings or police interviews. The stakes were real, and she knew it. I took a breath and tried to keep my voice calm. "I have not been to the clubhouse in over a week," I said. "I do not even know where the mail nook is." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that meant she had already decided I was guilty. "That is funny because I have a witness who saw you there on Tuesday," she said, "and I am offering you a fair deal right now. You paid the $140 as a community goodwill gesture, and we forget this ever happened. No police, no hearing, no problem. I am speaking for the community, and everyone wants this resolved quietly." I knew immediately it was a trap. If I paid, it would look like an admission of guilt. If I refused, she would escalate. I said I was not paying for something I did not take, and I wanted to see the witness statement and any camera footage from the clubhouse. Her expression shifted and the smile vanished. "You do not get to make demands," she said. "I am the board secretary, and I handle enforcement for this property. You have until Friday to pay, or I am blocking your package deliveries and filing a formal complaint with management." She turned and walked away before I could respond, leaving the cone in the guest spot like a warning marker. I went inside and my hands were shaking. I work in the field and I am used to pressure, but this was different. Debra was not interested in facts. She was interested in control. I pulled up the Magnolia Terrace portal on my laptop and searched for any notices or complaints under my unit. Nothing. I checked my delivery history and saw that 2 packages were marked as delayed with no explanation. She had already started. The next morning I went to the clubhouse to look for myself. The mail nook was a narrow alcove next to the community bulletin board. There was no charity box visible and no sign explaining what had happened to it. I took a photo with my phone and noticed the security camera mounted in the corner. The lens was angled toward the main entrance, but the nook was in a blind spot. I made a note of that because it would matter later. A neighbor I had seen around a few times, an older guy named Rick, was checking his mail and he looked over when he heard me moving. "You looking for something?" he asked. I told him about the missing charity box and Debra's accusation. He shook his head and his face went tight. "She did the same thing to me last year," he said. "Claimed I took a package from the outgoing mail bin. Turned out she had moved it herself and forgot. But by the time I proved it, I had already been fined and locked out of the gym for a month." Rick became my first real ally. He told me he had kept receipts and photos from his own ordeal and he would help me if I needed a witness. I asked him if he knew anyone else who had been targeted. He said there were at least 3 other residents who had been accused of petty theft or rule violations by Debra, but most of them just paid the fines to avoid the drama. "She has a pattern," he said. "She makes an accusation, offers a deal that sounds reasonable, and then when you agree, she adds new conditions or claims you violated something else. It is a shakedown." I thanked Rick and left the clubhouse. My plan was simple: gather proof, document everything, and force a confrontation where she could not move the goalposts. I started by requesting the security camera footage through the portal. The system said my request was received and would be reviewed within 5 business days. I also sent an email to the management company asking for clarification on the charity box incident and the delivery block. No response. On Wednesday, Debra posted a community warning on the Magnolia Terrace resident message board. The post did not name me directly, but it was obvious. Residents are reminded to remain vigilant about theft in common areas, it said. A recent incident involving missing charitable funds is under investigation. Anyone with information should contact the board secretary immediately. Several residents responded with concern messages, and one person asked if the police had been called. Debra replied that the matter was being handled internally, but that enforcement actions were pending. I felt my face go hot because the implication was clear. She was building a narrative where I was the thief and she was the hero protecting the community. I called the management company directly and got a receptionist who sounded bored. I explained the situation and asked to speak to someone in enforcement or compliance. She put me on hold for 6 minutes and then told me the property manager was out until Monday. I asked if there was anyone else who could help, and she said I could file a formal dispute through the portal, but it would take up to 10 business days to process. I hung up and realized Debra had timed this perfectly. She knew the management company was slow and that I would be stuck in limbo while she kept escalating. That afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of a tow truck authorization form with my unit number and license plate listed. The message said, "Final notice. Payment due by end of business Friday or your vehicle will be towed per HOA parking enforcement policy. Unauthorized occupancy of guest space detected." I looked out my window and saw the orange cone was still in the guest spot next to mine. She had not moved it. She was claiming I was the one violating parking rules by forcing me to park too close to the line. I went outside and moved the cone myself. Within 10 minutes, Debra was back. She had been watching. She walked up with her phone gimbal and started recording again. "You just tampered with official HOA safety equipment," she said. "That cone was placed there by board authority to mark a restricted zone." I kept my voice level and said the guest spot was not restricted and I had done nothing wrong. She ignored me and kept talking into the camera like she was narrating a police report. "Resident has now added tampering to the list of violations," she said. "This will be documented and submitted to management and local authorities as evidence of ongoing non-compliance." I felt the anger rising, but I forced it down. I asked her directly, "Where is the charity box right now?" She blinked and her script faltered for half a second. "That is not your concern," she said. "Your concern is paying what you owe." I pressed further. "If the box is missing, there should be a police report," I said. "Can I see the report number?" She stepped back and her face went red. "I do not have to show you anything," she said. "I am speaking for the community, and the community expects accountability. You have until Friday." She left again, and I went back inside. I was running out of time, and I needed concrete evidence. I called Rick and asked if he still had his documentation from the previous year. He said he did, and he could bring it over that evening. When he arrived, he had a thick binder full of printed emails, portal screenshots, and photos. He showed me a series of messages where Debra had accused him of taking a package, then claimed he had damaged a shared amenity, then added a late fee for not responding fast enough. Each time he complied, she added something new. It was exactly the pattern I was seeing. One document caught my eye. It was a vendor invoice packet from the towing company Debra had used to threaten Rick. The packet had sections covered with sticky notes, and the visible parts showed a billing structure that did not match what Debra had claimed. Rick said he had filed a complaint with the tow company, and they had eventually admitted that Debra had submitted the authorization without proper board approval. The company had refunded his fees and stopped working with Magnolia Terrace, but Debra had never faced any consequences. I asked Rick if I could make copies, and he said yes. I spent the next 2 hours scanning every page and uploading them to a cloud folder. I also took photos of the parking lot, the clubhouse mail nook, and the security camera angles. I created a timeline document that cross-referenced my work schedule, my delivery tracking numbers, and the dates Debra claimed I was near the charity box. None of it lined up. I had been on site at a client location 60 miles away on Tuesday when she said I was seen at the clubhouse. Thursday morning, I got another message from Debra. She had escalated again. This time she sent a formal notice through the portal claiming I had failed to respond to enforcement communications and that my amenity access was being suspended pending resolution of the theft investigation. I checked the portal and my key fob had been deactivated. I could not get into the gym, the pool, or the package room. She had locked me out. I went to the management office in person. It was a small satellite location in a strip mall about 2 miles from the property. The receptionist was the same woman I had spoken to on the phone. I explained the situation again and showed her the timeline document on my tablet. She looked uncomfortable and said the property manager still was not available, but she could schedule an appointment for the following week. I said I needed help now because my access had been suspended and I was being threatened with towing. She hesitated and then said she would send an urgent email to the regional supervisor. I thanked her and left, but I knew it would not be fast enough. Friday morning arrived and I still had not heard from management. I went to work and tried to focus, but my phone kept buzzing with portal notifications. Debra had posted another community message. Enforcement action proceeding as scheduled. Residents are reminded that violations must be resolved promptly to maintain community standards. I felt sick because I knew what was coming next. I got home at 4 in the afternoon and there was a tow truck in the parking lot. The driver was standing next to my car with a clipboard and Debra was next to him pointing at my vehicle and talking fast. I parked in a visitor spot and walked over. The driver looked at me and said, "You the owner?" I said yes and asked what was going on. He said he had an authorization from the HOA to tow my vehicle for unauthorized parking. I asked to see the authorization and he handed me the clipboard. It was the same form from the text message, but now it had a signature at the bottom. Debra's signature. I kept my voice calm and said I was disputing the authorization because I had not violated any parking rules. The driver shrugged and said he was just doing his job, and if I had a problem, I needed to take it up with the HOA. Debra stepped forward and smiled that same cold smile. "You had your chance to resolve this," she said. "Now you face the consequences." I looked at the driver and said I would pay the drop fee if he would wait 5 minutes while I called the management company. He looked annoyed, but agreed. I called the management office and got voicemail. I left a message explaining the situation and asking for immediate intervention. Then I called Rick and told him what was happening. He said he would come down and be a witness. While I waited, I started filming with my phone. Debra noticed and stepped closer. "You do not have permission to record me," she said. I reminded her that we were in a common area and I had every right to document what was happening. She called the tow driver over and said something I could not hear. He looked at me and said, "Look, man, I do not want to be in the middle of this. If you are going to dispute it, do it through the proper channels. I am leaving." The driver got in his truck and drove off without hooking my car. Debra's face went white with rage. "You just cost the association money," she said. "That drop fee is going on your account as a penalty." I said I would dispute that too, and I walked away before she could say anything else. I went inside and my heart was pounding. I had bought myself a little time, but I knew she would try again. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like this. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the vendor invoice packet Rick had shown me. If Debra had a pattern of abusing vendor relationships, maybe the current tow company did not know the full story either. I looked up the company online and found their main office number. I called first thing Saturday morning and asked to speak to a manager. The woman who answered said the manager was not in, but she could take a message. I explained that I was a resident at Magnolia Terrace, and I believed an unauthorized tow had been attempted using their company name. She sounded concerned and said she would pass the message along. 2 hours later, I got a call back from the tow company manager. He introduced himself as David and said he had reviewed the authorization form. He asked me if I had been notified in writing at least 72 hours in advance as required by New Mexico law. I said no. He sighed and said that was a problem because Debra had told him the notification had been completed. He said he was pulling his company out of any further actions at Magnolia Terrace until the board provided proper documentation. I thanked him and asked if he could send me a written statement confirming the authorization was improper. He said he would email it by end of day. I hung up and felt the first spark of hope. Debra had overplayed her hand. If I could prove she was abusing vendor relationships and bypassing proper procedures, the management company would have to act. I went back to the portal and started digging through the enforcement policy documents. I found the section on towing and it was clear. 72-hour written notice required. Authorization must be approved by property manager or board majority vote. And the resident must be given an opportunity to dispute before the tow occurs. Debra had skipped every step. Sunday afternoon, I was walking to my car when I saw a neighbor I did not recognize. She was walking a small terrier and she stopped when she saw me. "Are you the guy Debra is accusing of stealing?" she asked. I said yes and asked why. She looked around like she was checking for listeners and then said, "I saw her in the clubhouse storage closet last Tuesday. She was moving boxes around and she had the charity box with her. I thought it was weird because she kept looking over her shoulder like she did not want anyone to see." I asked if she would be willing to give a statement and she hesitated. "I do not want her coming after me," she said. "She already sent me a notice last month about my dog barking, and I had to pay a fine even though my dog was not even home that day." I understood her fear, but I needed her help. I promised I would not use her name publicly, and I just needed her to confirm what she saw if it came to a formal dispute. She finally agreed and gave me her phone number. Her name was Angela, and she said she had lived at Magnolia Terrace for 6 years. She told me Debra had been on the board for 3 years, and during that time at least a dozen residents had been accused of minor violations that never seemed to stick. Most people just paid to avoid the hassle. Monday morning, I went back to the management office. The receptionist saw me and looked relieved. "The property manager is in today," she said. "Let me see if she can meet with you." She disappeared into a back office and came out a minute later with a woman in her 50s wearing a blazer and holding a coffee mug. The property manager introduced herself as Linda and gestured for me to follow her. We sat down in a small conference room and I laid out everything: the timeline, the witness statements, the vendor invoice packet, the tow company email, and the portal access suspension. Linda listened without interrupting, and her face got darker as I went through each piece. When I finished, she said, "This is a serious problem. Debra does not have unilateral authority to suspend access or authorize towing. Those decisions require management approval or a board vote." I asked what the next steps were, and she said she would be contacting Debra immediately and reinstating my access. She also said she would be reviewing all of Debra's enforcement actions from the past year to see if there was a broader pattern. I asked if I could get a copy of the email she sent to Debra, and she said yes. I left the management office feeling like I was finally making progress, but I knew Deborah would not go quietly. I was right. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Deborah, and she was furious. "You went behind my back to management," she said. "That is a violation of the dispute resolution process, and I am adding it to your file." I told her I had every right to contact management, and I had done nothing wrong. She ignored me and kept talking. "Everyone agrees with me," she said. "I have messages from residents who saw you near the clubhouse, and they are willing to testify. You are not going to win this." I asked her to send me the messages so I could review them. She said she did not have to share anything with me and hung up. I immediately emailed Linda and told her about the call. She responded within an hour and said Deborah had been instructed not to contact me directly and any further enforcement communication would go through the management office. She also said my access had been reinstated and I should be able to use my key fob again. I tested it at the gym entrance and it worked. Tuesday evening, I got an email from Linda asking me to come to the management office Wednesday morning for a meeting. She said Deborah would also be present and we would be discussing the charity box incident and the enforcement actions. I agreed and spent the rest of the night preparing. I printed every document, screenshot, and photo I had. I put everything in a binder, organized by date. Rick offered to come as a witness, but I told him to stay on standby in case I needed him. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the management office at 9. Linda was already there, and so was Deborah. Deborah had her phone gimbal set up on the conference table, and she was wearing a cheap lanyard with a laminated card that said Board Secretary in large letters. Linda saw the phone and said, "We are not recording this meeting. Please put that away." Deborah argued that she had a right to document official business, but Linda was firm. "This is a management meeting, not a board meeting, and recording is not permitted without consent from all parties." Deborah reluctantly put the phone in her bag, but she kept the gimbal on the table like a prop. Linda started by summarizing the situation. She said there were multiple allegations and counter-allegations, and the purpose of the meeting was to establish facts and determine next steps. She asked Deborah to present her evidence first. Deborah pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table. It was a handwritten note that said, "Resident seen near Clubhouse Male Nook, Tuesday, April 9th between 2 and 4 p.m. Charity box missing same day. No signature, no date, no witness name." I asked who wrote the note, and Deborah said it was confidential. Linda said that was not acceptable, and if Deborah wanted to pursue an accusation, she needed to provide a verifiable witness statement. Deborah's face went red, and she said the witness was afraid of retaliation. Linda said that was not a valid reason to withhold identity in a formal dispute. She asked Deborah if she had any other evidence. Deborah said she had the tow authorization and the parking violation documentation. Linda pointed out that the tow authorization had been improperly executed and the tow company had already withdrawn from the action. Deborah tried to argue, but Linda cut her off. "You do not have the authority to authorize a tow without management approval," Linda said. "That is explicit in the governing documents." Linda turned to me and asked for my evidence. I opened the binder and walked her through the timeline. I showed her my work schedule, proving I was not at the clubhouse on Tuesday, April 9th. I showed her the vendor invoice packet from Rick's case, demonstrating Deborah's pattern of vendor abuse. I showed her the tow company email confirming the authorization was improper. I showed her Angela's witness statement describing Deborah moving the charity box in the storage closet. Linda took notes, and her expression was stone. When I finished, Linda asked Deborah to respond. Deborah stammered and said the witness was lying and I had fabricated the timeline. Linda asked if Deborah had checked the work schedule or contacted my employer before making the accusation. Deborah said that was not her responsibility. Linda closed her folder and said, "This meeting is over. Based on the evidence presented, there is no basis for the theft accusation and all enforcement actions against the resident are hereby rescinded." Debra, you are being formally reprimanded for improper enforcement procedures and abuse of vendor relationships. Management will be taking over all enforcement decisions at this property, and your discretion is removed effective immediately. Deborah stood up so fast her chair tipped over. You cannot do this, she said. I am the board secretary, and I am speaking for the community. Linda did not raise her voice, but her words were ice. The governing documents give management final authority over enforcement, she said. You have overstepped repeatedly, and the board will be notified. You are also being required to sit quietly while I read this reprimand letter aloud, so there is no confusion. Linda pulled out a printed letter and began reading. It outlined every violation: unauthorized access suspension, improper tow authorization, vendor intimidation, failure to follow dispute resolution procedures, and lack of verifiable evidence. Debra tried to interrupt twice, and both times Linda told her to sit down. When Linda finished, she handed Debra a copy of the letter and said a second copy would be sent to the full board and posted in the resident portal. Debra grabbed the letter and stormed out without another word. Linda turned to me and apologized. She said the management company took these situations seriously and she would be conducting a full audit of Debra's enforcement actions over the past year. She also said my access was fully restored and any fees or penalties on my account would be removed. I thanked her and asked what would happen to the charity box. Linda said she would be investigating that separately, and if theft had occurred, it would be reported to the police. She asked if I had any other questions, and I said no. I left the office and felt a weight lift. I sat in my car for a minute and just breathed. My phone buzzed with a portal notification. My access had been restored and there was a new post from management, effective immediately. All enforcement actions at Magnolia Terrace Community Association will be reviewed and approved by the Property Management Office before any resident contact or penalties are issued. This policy applies to all board members and committee chairs without exception. Residents with concerns about previous enforcement actions should contact the management office directly. That afternoon, I was getting mail from the clubhouse when Angela found me. She looked nervous but relieved. I heard what happened, she said. Thank you for keeping my name out of it. I told her Linda had handled everything and Debra was no longer running enforcement. Angela smiled for the first time since I had met her and said maybe things would finally calm down. I hoped she was right. Thursday morning, I got a call from Linda. She said the audit was nearly complete and she had found evidence that Debra had been taking small amounts from the community petty cash fund and blaming it on residents to cover the shortfall. The charity box incident was part of that pattern. Linda said the board had been notified and Debra had been asked to resign. If she refused, the board would hold a removal vote. Linda also said the police had been contacted and a report was being filed. I asked if I needed to do anything and she said no, but I might be contacted for a statement later. Friday afternoon, the portal exploded with activity. Debra had posted a long, rambling message claiming she was being targeted by a conspiracy and that management had no authority to remove her. The post was up for less than an hour before it was deleted and replaced with a notice from the board president. The board has accepted the resignation of Debra Mullen effective immediately. We thank her for her service and wish her well. All board secretary duties will be handled by the board president until a replacement is appointed. We apologize to any residents who were affected by recent enforcement issues and encourage you to reach out to management with any concerns. The comments section filled with reactions. Some residents expressed shock, others said they had suspected something was wrong for months, and a few thanked management for taking action. Rick sent me a private message. You did it. She is finally gone. I replied and told him I could not have done it without his help. He said he was just glad someone finally stood up to her. Over the next few weeks, the management company completed the full audit. They found that Debra had improperly authorized at least 15 enforcement actions over the past year, many of which involved fabricated violations or threats of towing. Several residents who had paid fines were issued refunds. The tow company David managed sent a formal letter terminating their contract with Magnolia Terrace and citing Deborah's abuse of the authorization process as the reason. The board issued a public apology and announced new oversight procedures to prevent future abuse. I also learned the final twist. The charity box had never been missing. Deborah had moved it to the storage closet to create panic and then blamed me to justify a shakedown. Angela's statement was the key that unraveled everything. The police investigated and determined that while Deborah had not technically stolen the box, she had engaged in fraud by filing false accusations and attempting to collect money under false pretenses. The district attorney declined to prosecute due to the relatively small amounts involved, but Deborah was placed on a watch list and barred from holding any HOA leadership position in the state. The receipt and return record that pointed to Karen's account turned out to be a vendor refund form showing Deborah had returned clubhouse supplies she claimed were stolen and pocketed the cash. Management takes over enforcement decisions and removes Karen's discretion became the new normal at Magnolia Terrace. Karen is forced to sit quietly while the evidence is read aloud was the moment in Linda's office when Deborah realized she had no way out. The funny karma beat came a month later. Deborah tried to attend a board meeting as a resident to complain about her removal. The new board secretary asked her to sign in, and she pulled out her old laminated board secretary card. The board president calmly informed her that the card was no longer valid and she would need to sit in the resident section like everyone else. Deborah tried to flex authority, and the policy said she could not. She left before the meeting even started. I ran into Linda at the clubhouse one afternoon, and she told me the board had implemented a new dispute resolution system that required all enforcement actions to be reviewed by an independent third party before penalties could be issued. She said the system was working well and resident complaints had dropped significantly. I thanked her again for handling everything, and she said it was her job. She also mentioned that the board was looking for new members, and I should consider running. I laughed and said I had enough drama for 1 year. My probation at work ended, and my manager told me I was doing great. I had been worried the HOA chaos would spill over into my job, but it never did. I kept my head down, documented everything, and let the system work. It was slow and frustrating, but it worked. Rick and I still get coffee sometimes, and he keeps me updated on the HOA gossip. He says the new board secretary is fair and transparent, and nobody misses Deborah. I still live at Magnolia Terrace, and the parking lot feels a little less hostile now. The orange cones are gone, the tow threats are gone, the petty accusations are gone. Deborah's phone gimbal and her fake authority props are gone. I keep the evidence binder in my closet just in case, but I have not needed it. Sometimes I see Angela walking her dog and she waves. Sometimes I see new residents moving in, and I wonder if they know the history. I hope they do not have to learn it the hard way. The whole experience taught me something important. HOAs are only as good as the people running them, and when those people abuse their power, you have to fight back with documentation, patience, and a willingness to follow the process even when it feels impossibly slow. You cannot let someone like Deborah intimidate you into paying for something you did not do. You cannot let them move the goalposts and hope you will give up. You have to stand your ground and trust that the truth will come out if you give it enough light. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.